The lights burned hot against the polished wood of the debate stage, and the cameras caught every flicker of expression. The room was thick with expectation, charged like a storm about to break. America was watching, not just for policy points, but for the unspoken test of authenticity that every debate secretly carries. Kamala Harris leaned forward, voice sharp, eyes fixed on Jasmine Crockett. "With all due respect, this isn't the courtroom, Congresswoman. This is the national stage. We're talking about real qualifications to lead." The words landed like a slap. The audience inhaled in unison, a wave of gasps rising above the studio air. A few scattered claps broke through, quickly drowned out by low murmurs that rippled across the crowd. Some nodded, impressed by Harris's confident jab. Others shifted uncomfortably, sensing something more hostile than polished. Crockett did not flinch. She sat still, her hands folded calmly, her eyes locked on Harris with the kind of steady patience that unnerves opponents. For a heartbeat, the entire room seemed to hang in suspension, as though even the cameras were waiting to see whether this was the moment she'd be cornered. The moderators glanced nervously between the two women, unsure whether to intervene or let the confrontation play out. The air carried that unmistakable electricity when the audience knows they're witnessing something bigger than talking points. Harris pressed again, her tone clipped, rehearsed. "This job isn't about passion speeches or fiery moments. It's about the experience to carry the weight of the presidency. That's what the American people need, not performance." The crowd reacted louder this time, half applause, half protest. A man in the third row shook his head, muttering something about hypocrisy. A young woman clapped hard, her face tight with approval. The divide was visceral, visible in the shifting of bodies, the tightening of jaws, the swelling noise. And still, Jasmine Crockett remained composed. She leaned ever so slightly forward, a spark in her eyes. It wasn't anger. It was something more dangerous to Harris's argument. Clarity. Because what came next wasn't just going to answer Harris's challenge. It was going to peel back the mask, exposing the contradiction Harris hoped no one would dare name. But Jasmine's reply didn't just answer the question. It cut to the heart of Harris's own contradictions. Asterisk. This wasn't just another debate. It was a collision between two visions of America, compressed into the tension of a single stage. On one side stood Kamala Harris, a figure who embodied the polished pathways of power, the carefully measured rhetoric, the calculated handshakes. She was the vice president, the product of decades navigating the treacherous climb of American politics. On the other stood Jasmine Crockett, a newcomer on the national stage, but a fighter with roots that went deeper than strategy. Her currency wasn't polish. It was authenticity. That contrast is why every word mattered tonight. It wasn't only about policy proposals or campaign slogans. It was about which story America would believe. Would voters rally behind the practiced fluency of an establishment voice? Or would they gravitate toward the raw, unfiltered truth of someone who had lived the battles she spoke about? The stakes grew heavier with each passing moment. Harris's words, meant to diminish Crockett, had instead spotlighted the divide between them. Harris leaned on credentials, on the resume of power, attorney general, senator, vice president. Crockett leaned on lived experience, the kind that cannot be polished away in a press release. And that tension was more than personal. It was generational. It was cultural. It was America's ongoing debate with itself. Asterisk for younger voters, for immigrants. For those who had long felt unseen, Crockett was more than a participant. She was a mirror. Every time she stood her ground, they saw their own refusal to shrink back. Every time she spoke with the cadence of conviction, they heard their own struggles echoed in her voice. Harris, meanwhile, represented something both respected and resented. The path that promised legitimacy, but demanded compromise. The air in the auditorium reflected that divide. The applause for Harris was firm, but it lacked fire. The murmurs of support for Crockett were quieter, but they carried a different energy, defiant, emotional, charged with recognition. That's why this exchange mattered so much. A call-out about qualifications wasn't just a jab in a debate. It was a referendum on who gets to claim leadership in America. Is leadership defined by polished titles and long resumes? Or can it also be born from standing in the trenches, fighting uphill battles with nothing but grit? Asterisk. And it was here that the true tension surfaced. Because Crockett's calm silence after Harris's jab wasn't weakness, it was calculation. She was waiting, letting Harris dig deeper, letting the audience lean in. She knew that her response had to be more than clever. It had to land with the weight of lived truth, heavy enough to pierce through the armor of political polish. The camera zoomed in, amplifying every flicker of expression. Harris smiled tightly, believing she had seized the upper hand. Crockett's lips curved just slightly, the kind of restrained smile that signals not surrender, but certainty. What no one yet realized, not the moderators, not the crowd, not even Harris herself, was that Crockett was about to turn the entire exchange upside down. Because behind that calm exterior was a revelation so sharp, so undeniable, that it would not only answer Harris's challenge, but expose a contradiction the vice president could not explain away. And when Crockett finally chose to speak, that revelation would leave Kamala Harris visibly shaken. Kamala Harris's story has always been one of firsts. The first black woman to serve as Attorney General of California. The first South Asian woman elected to the United States Senate. The first woman, the first black woman, the first South Asian woman to rise to the office of Vice President of the United States. Her career was a monument to ambition, discipline, and breaking barriers that had stood for centuries. Too many. She was proof that the arc of American politics could bend toward inclusion. But accomplishments alone never tell the full story. With Harris, the brilliance of her resume has always been shadowed by the baggage of contradictions that never quite went away. No matter how carefully they were managed, her years as a prosecutor, for instance, gave her the kind of credibility that made her a formidable political figure. She spoke often of being tough, but fair, and of holding power accountable. Yet critics remembered another version. A prosecutor who fought to uphold wrongful convictions, who too often sided with the machinery of the system instead of those crushed beneath it. Those choices stood uneasily beside her, later rebranding as a progressive champion, in the Senate. Otis's questioning style during hearings won her viral fame. Clips of her sharp, rapid-fire interrogations against Trump administration officials circulated widely, earning her the nickname the female Obama among some progressives. Yet, away from the soundbites, her positions sometimes drifted. She supported Medicare for all until she didn't. She embraced sweeping reform until the political winds shifted. That flexibility sold as pragmatism, left others whispering the harsher word, calculation. Then there was the matter of presence. On paper, Kamala Harris was everything Democrats could want. Young enough to symbolize energy, experienced enough to command authority, diverse enough to represent modern America. But in the flesh, her public appearances sometimes stumbled. The laugh that arrived a beat too long, the answer that spiraled without clarity, the moment when scripted polish cracked into awkward disconnect. They were not disqualifying missteps, but they chipped away at the aura of inevitability her supporters tried to project. And perhaps that is what made her so polarizing. Harris embodied both aspiration and apprehension. She was the trailblazer who proved barriers could be broken, and the politician who reminded people of how easily ideals could be compromised. She carried history on her shoulders, but also the contradictions of someone who had climbed through the establishment rather than around it. Her allies pointed to the enormity of her challenges, the double standards women face, the relentless scrutiny of being the first, the impossibility of pleasing both progressives and moderates in a fractured party. But her critics saw something else, a polished figure who spoke of progress, but often seemed most loyal to the mechanics of survival in politics. That tension followed her into every stage. When she spoke, there was always the sense of someone aware of being watched. Every word weighed, every gesture measured. It was the armor she had learned to wear to survive in politics at the highest levels. Yet armor, by its nature, hides what is real. And sometimes, it cracks. This is the image Jasmine Crockett faced across the debate stage. A vice president whose career was studded with triumphs, also threaded with contradictions. Harris stood as both historic and vulnerable. She carried the confidence of power, but also the fragility of someone who knew her record could be turned against her. Because for all her trailblazing, Harris's story contained moments that could not be erased. The courtroom decisions that cut against her current branding. The strategic shifts that made her seem less like a leader of conviction and more like a politician of convenience. And the awkward silences, the nervous laughs, the moments where authenticity slipped through her fingers. In that room, under those lights, the contradictions weren't just background details. They were the silent companions standing beside her. And they were the very weaknesses Crockett had the power to illuminate. Kamala Harris had built a career on discipline, on presentation, on the calculated performance of authority. But performances can falter, and masks can slip. And that's exactly the mask Crockett was about to rip away. Asterisk. Jasmine Crockett's story does not begin under the bright lights of Washington or in the manicured hallways of power. It begins in Texas, not the Texas of glossy postcards and oil baron myths, but the Texas of working-class neighborhoods, where resilience is not a choice, it is survival. She was the daughter of parents who worked long hours and stretched paychecks thin, who taught her early that dignity was not something given by titles or wealth, but earned through effort, persistence, and a refusal to bow down. In those early years, Jasmine learned to navigate a world that did not expect her to rise. She was told to aim lower, to be realistic. Teachers, classmates, even neighbors sometimes questioned whether a young black girl from her side of town could truly break through. Those doubts did not discourage her. They carved her into steel. Each dismissive glance, each underestimation became a reminder that she would have to fight twice as hard, speak twice as loud, and carry herself twice as firmly to claim the respect others were granted without question. That fight carried her into law. Not corporate law, not the cushy positions that promise prestige, but distance from struggle. Jasmine chose civil rights law. She chose to stand in courtrooms where the stakes were not financial profits, but human dignity. Her clients were the voiceless, the marginalized, the people who had been told by the system itself that they did not matter. In defending them, she was defending the echoes of her own childhood, the invisible battles fought in communities like the one that raised her. It was in those trenches that she found her calling. While others pursued paths designed to impress donors or groom resumes, Crockett pursued cases that left her drained but determined, scarred but sharpened. She saw firsthand how laws on paper often dissolved when confronted with the biases of power. She understood what it meant to walk into a courtroom where the odds were already tilted. And she developed the skill that would one day define her politics, the ability to turn underestimation into fuel, to disarm arrogance with clarity, and to steady herself against storms meant to break her. When she entered politics, the pattern repeated. Doors closed faster for her than for others. Funding was harder to raise. Her opponents dismissed her as unpolished, too raw, too fiery. They underestimated her because she did not fit the mold, and because they thought the mold was the only way to win. But what her detractors called raw, her supporters called real. Where others were careful to avoid offense, Jasmine spoke without varnish. Where others softened their tone for approval, she sharpened hers for truth. Her rise was not meteoric. It was ground gained inch by inch, with bruises to show for it. She was underestimated, dismissed, written off. And yet, each time, she broke through. Because unlike those who relied on polish and pedigree, Crockett carried a weapon far more dangerous: authenticity. She did not borrow her conviction from consultants or polling memos. She carried it from her roots, from the grit of her upbringing, from the cases she fought in court, from the lived reality of those who looked at her and saw themselves. That authenticity made her different. In a political world where too many spoke in rehearsed sound bites, Crockett spoke with the cadence of lived truth. She did not need to mimic passion. She radiated it. She did not need to craft empathy. She had lived it. Every speech, every answer, every confrontation was infused with the weight of someone who had walked the road she described. And that is why her supporters did not just agree with her, they believed her. As a black woman in politics, she carried burdens Harris knew too well: the skepticism, the double standards, the sharp edge of scrutiny. But unlike Harris, Crockett did not attempt to smooth those edges away. She leaned into them. She wore her defiance openly, made her fire inseparable from her identity. She was not interested in fitting into a system designed to exclude people like her. She was interested in breaking it open so that others could follow. And so, when Crockett sat across from Kamala Harris on that debate stage, she was not just another politician trading lines for applause. She was the embodiment of a story millions of Americans recognized, the story of being told you are not enough, and proving again and again that you are more than enough. She was the reminder that leadership can come not only from institutions, but from lived
struggle from the soil of ordinary neighborhoods.
From the sweat of courtrooms where justice feels out of reach, from the defiance of a woman who refuses to shrink. This was her power. She did not just represent herself. She represented every person who had been silenced, every voter who had been overlooked, every child told to dream smaller. She was one of us, and in her steadiness was the promise that being one of us could one day mean standing at the highest levels of power. And it was that very grit that turned Harris's attack into an opening for Crockett's most devastating counter. Asterisk. The rhythm of the debate had shifted. After the initial strike, Kamala Harris pressed her advantage, circling back to the same refrain with sharpened precision. This isn't about passionate speeches, Congresswoman. It's about readiness. It's about being credible on the world stage. About having the experience to look foreign leaders in the eye and speak for America with authority. Her tone dripped with practiced firmness, the kind that wins applause from those who crave order. The crowd responded with a burst of clapping, but it wasn't unanimous. A second wave of murmurs rippled through the room, low and unsettled. As though a current of doubt was beginning to form beneath the surface, Crockett remained motionless. Her posture upright, her expression a study in composure. She didn't interrupt, didn't rush to defend herself. Instead, she let Harris build her case brick by brick. Knowing full well that the taller the tower, the harder the fall, Harris leaned forward again. We can't afford inexperience. Not now. Not with the threats America faces abroad. Not with the challenges here at home. This moment calls for steadiness, not theatrics. The word theatrics landed heavily, and this time the reaction fractured. A group near the front erupted in loud cheers, waving placards in approval. But in the back rows, boos began to rise, deep and guttural. Someone shouted, "That's hypocrisy!" The tension was no longer contained. It was spilling into the air, visible in the clash of expressions, audible in the clash of voices. Crockett slowly shifted in her chair, finally moving, her gaze still fixed on Harris. The slight tilt of her head carried the weight of challenge, yet her lips remained pressed together. Silence, in that moment, was louder than Harris's words. It was as if Crockett had decided to let Harris audition for her own undoing. Sensing resistance in the room, Harris doubled down. She painted herself as the tested hand, the voice of reliability, the protector of American stability. The American people need more than slogans, she said. They need someone with the proven record to deliver. They need to know they can trust who's standing at that podium. The words echoed, rehearsed yet brittle. Each sentence landed, but not with the force Harris expected. The cheers were there, but they were no longer dominant. The boos had grown stronger, defiant. A chant started faintly in the middle rows, "Let her speak. Let her speak," and quickly caught momentum until the moderators leaned forward, nervously signaling for quiet. Crockett's supporters were no longer silent. They had found their voices, and their insistence cracked through the vice president's polished veneer. Harris's smile tightened. She attempted to push forward, raising her voice over the noise, but the chant kept surging. The stage lights glared brighter, magnifying every beat of sweat, every forced grin, and through it all, Jasmine Crockett sat steady, her expression calm, her eyes unwavering. She didn't need to plead for space. The audience was doing it for her. Every second, Harris continued, her authority thinned. Every jab, instead of silencing Crockett, amplified the contrast. A politician trying to dominate versus a woman so certain of her truth that she didn't need to rush to prove it. The cameras caught it perfectly. The vice president straining. Her words met with a divided audience, while Crockett radiated composure. The longer Harris spoke, the more it seemed like noise against Crockett's silence. Then, a moment of quiet broke through. The chant subsided, the applause faded, and the room held its breath. Harris leaned back, perhaps believing she had reasserted control. She offered a smile that sought to mask irritation. Crockett finally shifted forward, the faintest curve of a smile playing at the edge of her lips. She hadn't spoken in several minutes, but in that pause, she had taken command of the stage. The audience sensed it, the moderator sensed it, even Harris sensed it, though she would never admit it. The drumbeat of tension had reached its peak. The stage was set, the divide was clear, and the silence was unbearable. Everyone knew Crockett was about to answer, and everyone felt the weight of what was coming. Then came the moment Harris never saw coming. The silence was thick, the kind that carries a weight heavier than noise ever could. The audience had felt the shift. The cameras caught every twitch in Harris's expression, every flicker of irritation masked by a politician's trained smile. Jasmine Crockett leaned into the microphone, calm and deliberate, her voice low at first, forcing the room to lean in. "Madam Vice President," she began, steady as stone, "you say this is about readiness? About credibility? About steadiness, not theatrics?" She paused, letting the words breathe. The stillness was surgical. Even those who had booed moments ago went quiet, waiting for what came next. "But here's what I find curious," Crockett continued, her eyes locked on Harris. Her tone neither angry nor pleading, but sharp enough to cut glass. "You speak of steadiness, yet you built your reputation on moments of theatrics, quick one-liners on debate stages, viral sound bites. And when the cameras moved on, so often the action never came." A murmur rippled through the audience. The truth had been put on the table, and it was raw. Crockett didn't rush. She let Harris squirm in the silence before pressing forward. "You say this isn't about slogans, but weren't you the one who, back in 2019, promised sweeping criminal justice reform, only to turn around and defend the very systems that locked away thousands of black and brown men for minor drug offenses?" Gasps. The crowd erupted in fragmented reactions. Some cheers, some audible shocks. A scattered, "That's right," shouted from the back. Harris's face tightened, the practiced smile faltering at the edges. Crockett leaned in further, her tone unwavering. "You call me untested. But what exactly was tested when you stood on that stage and declared support for Medicare for all, only to walk it back within weeks? You called it bold then. Was it steady leadership? Or theatrics?" The audience now split down the middle, noise surging like a tide. Applause clashed with jeers, and for a moment, the moderators tried to regain control. But Crockett held her hand up gently, and the noise dimmed, as though the room itself recognized she wasn't finished. Her voice softened, and that softness carried more force than shouting ever could. "I grew up in Texas, the daughter of working folks who didn't have lobbyists or PACs fighting for them. I became a lawyer not for headlines, but to defend the people this system chews up and spits out. And I've never had the privilege of forgetting those people when the cameras turn off." The crowd hushed again. It wasn't just a rebuttal now, it was personal, grounded, moral. Crockett had shifted the battlefield from Harris's polished rhetoric to Crockett's lived truth. Then, the strike that left no room for retreat. "So when you question my readiness, Madam Vice President, what you're really saying is that the struggles of ordinary people, people who look like me, people I've defended my whole career, don't qualify as a real experience. You're saying that unless power has already blessed you, you don't belong here. And I reject that." The words detonated. Gasps gave way to an explosion of applause, cheers rising so loud they drowned out the moderators. The camera panned across the audience, some on their feet, fists in the air, others stunned into silence. And Harris? Her eyes flickered downward, then back up. The smile stretched, but fragile. She adjusted the papers in front of her, though there was nothing to read. Her practiced cool was cracking under the weight of the moment. Crockett, sensing the shift, pressed once more, voice precise, surgical. "You see, the difference between us is simple. You talk about credibility as if it's earned in sound bites or high offices. I've lived credibility. Every time I stood beside a client, nobody else would defend. Every time I spoke truth in rooms where I wasn't invited. That's not theatrics. That's survival. That's leadership." The roar of the audience reached its peak, echoing like thunder through the debate hall. Some supporters of Harris tried to clap back, but their applause drowned beneath the wave of Crockett's momentum. The visual told the story. One woman rattled, fighting to keep composure. The other, unflinching, her words resonating like gospel. And then, the pause. Crockett let the cheers die down before adding her final strike, measured in cold. "So if this is a test of steadiness, of credibility, then I thank you for giving me the chance to prove it here tonight. Because the steadiness isn't in pretending to be flawless. It's in standing firm when you're underestimated, when you're dismissed, when you're told you're not enough, and refusing to break. That, Madam Vice President, is something I know better than anyone on this stage. Silence. Not awkward silence. Reverent silence. The kind that follows revelation." Harris forced a chuckle, trying to pivot, but the damage was done. Her authority no longer filled the room. The camera zoomed in on Crockett's face, calm, resolute, unshaken. The moderator scrambled to move to the next topic, but the energy in the hall had already been rewritten. Crockett had not just defended herself. She had turned Harris's own attack into evidence against her. The hypocrisy lay bare, and the audience knew it. The ripple effect didn't stop on that stage. It exploded far beyond. The debate hall had barely emptied when the internet lit up like wildfire. Within minutes, Twitter's trending bar was ablaze with hashtags. Hashtag Crockett Truth, hashtag KAMALA called out, hashtag mic drop moment. Clips of Jasmine's takedowns spread across timelines with dizzying speed. The 20-second exchange clipped, subtitled, and reposted thousands of times. Some videos slowed the moment. Harris's smile faltered, replaying it like a cinematic freeze frame, set to dramatic music. Others highlighted the crowd's eruption, captions screaming, "History was made tonight." The talk was no slower. Creators stitched Crockett's words into reactions, some wide-eyed, hands on their cheeks in disbelief, others cheering like they were at a championship game. Memes sprouted instantly. Harris's papers being adjusted became a symbol of fragility, while Crockett's calm, lean into the mic became an emblem of confidence. When you bring receipts to the fight, read one viral caption. Another declared, "That's not just debate, that's justice." Late-night hosts pounced. One compared Crockett's counter to a surgical strike. Another joked, "Forget fact-checkers. Harris needs a soul checker after that one." Analysts on cable news replayed the exchange over and over, some marveling at Crockett's poise, others warning about Harris's vulnerability. "This was a defining moment," one commentator declared. "The kind of moment that doesn't just win a debate, it rewrites the trajectory of a candidacy." But beyond the pundits and polished takes, the real impact was unfolding in the stories of everyday people. On Facebook and Instagram, teachers, nurses, service workers, and young activists were posting in solidarity. A Latina teacher in Arizona wrote, "I've sat in meetings where I was talked down to, questioned like my experience didn't count. Tonight, Crockett spoke for me." A Black single mother in Detroit shared a clip with the caption, "This is what it looks like when someone who knows the struggle refuses to back down." Even immigrant communities chimed in. A Nigerian father wrote on X, "They tell us we are not qualified. They tell us we are not ready." Tonight, Crockett showed that lived struggle is the strongest qualification. The post amassed thousands of retweets, striking a chord across borders. On YouTube, reaction videos from influencers and independent commentators flooded the feed. Progressives hailed the moment as authenticity versus artifice, while centrists debated whether Harris had underestimated Crockett's grit. But the most powerful videos weren't from influencers at all. They came from regular people filming themselves in kitchens, cars, and backyards, saying, "Finally, someone told the truth." Numbers told the story. Crockett's follower count skyrocketed by hundreds of thousands across platforms in less than 24 hours. Donations to her campaign spiked, small dollar contributions pouring in from across the country, with messages like, "For standing up when it mattered." Meanwhile, Harris's team scrambled to do damage control, releasing carefully worded statements about unity and shared goals. But the replies under those posts told another story: skepticism, disappointment, and a flood of Crockett hashtags. Cable news panels the next day called it a generational earthquake. Commentators framed it as the moment authenticity had outshined political polish. When the outsider energy of a fighter collided with the establishment sheen of the vice president and one anchor summed it up bluntly: Crockett didn't just survive the stage with Harris, she owned it. And yet, the reverberations weren't confined to politics. Something deeper was happening. Communities that had long felt dismissed, silenced, or underestimated found validation in Crockett's words. She wasn't just speaking at Harris, she was speaking for them. The applause in that hall had spilled outward into homes and hearts, reminding people that truth can cut through gloss and grit can eclipse power. But perhaps the most telling signal came not from the pundits or the platforms, but from the quiet comments under viral clips. Simple notes like, "I feel seen," or "She said what we've all been thinking." For many, this wasn't just a political skirmish, it was a cultural reckoning, and the energy showed no signs of slowing. Because Crockett hadn't just won the moment, she had reframed the bigger fight. In the end, the debate was not remembered for its policy points or rehearsed talking lines. It was remembered for the clash between appearance and authenticity, between the comfort of polished hierarchy and the courage of raw truth. That was the heartbeat of the night, authenticity proving itself, greater than political polish. Crockett had not relied on decades of establishment gravitas. She had relied on something far more durable, the lived grit of someone who fought her way into every room she entered. Where Harris spoke with the cadence of strategy, Crockett spoke with the cadence of survival and service. And that difference pierced through the noise. The moral clarity was undeniable. Courage will always speak louder than complacency. Authenticity will always outlast choreography. What Crockett demonstrated on that stage was not just sharp debating, it was a reclamation of dignity. She turned Harris's jab into a mirror, and in doing so, she revealed something larger than either candidate: the hunger of a nation for leaders who embody truth, not performance. In that moment, Crockett became more than a contender. She became a voice of justice. She embodied the pride of those who had been told they didn't belong. She carried the dignity of working-class roots, immigrant families, and overlooked communities. And in her calm dismantling of hypocrisy, she reminded America of its own promise that leadership doesn't belong only to the polished few, but to anyone who has the courage to stand, to fight, to speak. This wasn't just about Harris and Crockett. It wasn't even just about Democrats or Republicans. It was about the universal story that reverberates across generations, truth speaking louder than hierarchy. The moment Crockett's words echoed across that stage, they also echoed across the country, becoming a reminder that the measure of leadership is not the title you hold, but the truth you carry. And that is why this debate lives on in memory. Because it wasn't just politics, it was a reckoning. A reckoning with how America defines readiness, who it calls legitimate, and whose voice gets to be heard. Crockett answered not just for herself, but for millions who had been dismissed in similar ways, in boardrooms, classrooms, and daily conversations. The resonance reached far beyond that night. It became a touchstone for conversations in homes, churches, and community centers. People pointed to Crockett and said, "That's what it looks like when someone refuses to shrink back." She became, for many, proof that dignity can stare down dismissiveness and win. But perhaps the most powerful part of this story is that the lesson isn't confined to that debate stage. It is still echoing today. Every time someone is told they are not qualified because their background doesn't fit the mold, Crockett's reply stands as a reminder. Qualification is not about how smooth your resume looks. It is about how deep your truth runs. And so, The debate ended, but the reckoning did not. The audience left the hall, the cameras switched off, but the message lingered like an unshakable cord. Authenticity over polish. Courage over complacency. Dignity over dismissal. That was Jasmine Crockett's gift to the moment and to America, and the lesson still echoes today. Kamala tried to call her out, but in the end, it was Jasmine's truth that called her out. That's the moment the cameras captured. The moment the country couldn't stop replaying not Harris's interruption, not her polished resume, but the quiet strength of a woman who turned dismissal into dignity. And that is the lasting image. Justice standing taller than arrogance. Authenticity shining brighter than hypocrisy. Crockett didn't just answer Harris. She reframed what it means to belong, what it means to lead, what it means to claim America's promise. If you believe authenticity will always shine, brighter than hypocrisy, share this story. Let it ripple across timelines, dinner tables, and conversations. If you felt the power of dignity over dismissal, let others feel it too. And if you want to witness more moments where truth triumphs over arrogance, where courage speaks louder than privilege, and where ordinary grit becomes extraordinary strength, subscribe now. This is only the beginning. Picture it, Crockett walking off that stage with the calm stride of someone who knows she doesn't need to prove herself anymore. The audience's cheers still echoing. Harris left in stunned silence, her smile frozen, her armor cracked. That's not just a debate memory. That's a cinematic reminder of what happens when truth refuses to bow. Because sometimes the most powerful mic drop isn't loud at all. It's calm. It's steady. It's undeniable. And it changes everything.